How to place down steel between two columns. In this tutorial, we're going to show you 3 different ways to place steel between 2 columns and make sure you've got the proper elevation points. We're going to go into the architectural bin and we're going to grab a wide flange shape from a pre-existing catalog. We're going to click place. Then we're going to come over to the item box. Notice the steel tab is depressed, and we're going to say to hold this beam by the bottom center, because we want to attach the bottom of this beam and lay it on top of the column. Then what we're going to do is we're going to click between both columns. Now notice currently that we have node highlighted. We're going to click on the center node of one column, and then we're going to click on the center node of another column. And then we're going to hit 0, enter for the rotation. Now notice that currently the elevation is at 0. It did not go to the top of the columns, which is where we wanted it. The reason is because columns have nodes at both the top and the bottom of the column. And AutoCAD is going to snap the entity you are holding to whichever node is closer to your current elevation. You can see that our current elevation was actually at 0. So AutoCAD actually snapped the bottom, or the point we were holding, the bottom center of the beam, to the node closest to 0. So if we wanted to make sure that the beam was going to be placed at the top of the column, and we wanted to make sure it snapped to the node on top, one of the things we can do is just set our current elevation higher than the top of the column. For example, we're going to come and grab that beam again. We're going to hit place, and this time we're going to take the red line, or current elevation, and set it to 100 feet in the air. We're going to hit enter. Now 100 foot is way above the top of our column. But once we go to snap to this node, the nearest node available would be the node at the top of the column. So it's just a little trick. We can now click here, and then we can come over here and we can click this as well, hit 0, enter for rotation, and now we have the beam perfectly placed at the right elevation. Another method for making sure we get the right elevation is to utilize the replace Z option. Now there are separate tutorials on how to use the replace Z, but here we're going to show you how to utilize an existing automatic and give it the proper elevation and make sure everything's correct. We're going to delete what we've drawn here, and we're going to go over to our automatic bin, and we're going to check the Z on button. That's going to be the AutoCAD or PractiCAD command automatic that turns replace Z on. When replace Z on is active, basically regardless of what elevation a node is at that you snap to, PractiCAD is going to place down that entity you're holding at whatever your current elevation is, which means whatever you put in the elevation box. So what we're going to do is we're just going to come and we're going to grab a wide flange shape. We're going to hit place, and we're going to put in exactly what elevation we want this beam to be. And that's going to be at 10 foot. So no matter what, wherever I place this on the drawing, no matter what node I snap to, regardless of where that node may be on the Z axis, when replace Z is on, PractiCAD is going to follow the current elevation, or whatever's in your red line in your elevation box. So what we're going to do here is you can see that it's at 10 foot current. So all we need to do now is just simply click here, and just click here, hit 0, enter, and you can see that because replace Z is on, we have the beam at the right height. One key thing to mention is if you do utilize this, once you're done using replace Z, you probably want to make sure that you do shut it off. The last option is to control our endpoint snaps to make sure that PractiCAD puts the entity at the proper elevation. PractiCAD offers an endpoint snap which rides at the top, center, and bottom of the column. We're going to go into isometric view, and we're going to grab a beam, and we're going to attempt to place it, and we're going to isolate the endpoint. So I'm going to hold down the shift key and right click, and we're going to go isolate the endpoint for this, and we're going to show you that currently PractiCAD is only highlighting one point, and you can see that that endpoint node happens to be, the endpoint snap happens to be at the center of the column. And the reason for that is inside the item box, underneath the column tab, we have a place here that says snap to, just like we do in steel. And you'll notice that currently it says snap to Z center. Now the snap to has to do with the endpoint node. And what that means is if we switch the snap to here to the bottom or to the top, that if we go to attach a beam and isolate the endpoint, that only that node will be available. So once again, if we come over, see here that the node that's now available for the endpoint is at the top of the column. No longer is it available in the middle. So we can utilize that to put it at the right elevation. So to demonstrate this, we're going to go back into the top view. We're going to grab a beam from our bin. We're going to hit place. We've already set the snap in the column tab here. It's already been set to snap to top. So you can see that here we've got the current elevation at 0. But even though the current elevation is at 0, because the only endpoint node available on this object will be the top one, it's going to snap it to the proper place anyway. So what we need to do is we're going to hold shift and right click to isolate the endpoint. And it's important to make sure we isolate endpoint. And we can get a verification by just holding our mouse here, and you can see that AutoCAD's showing us that we're holding the endpoint. We're going to click once. Then we need to shift right click again and isolate the endpoint for this connection. We hold it here. Once we see endpoint, we can click. Now after we rotate it, you'll notice that once again we are at bottom 10 foot where we want it. So that concludes the 3 different methods to making sure we get the right elevation points when connecting between 2 columns or any 2 entities in AutoCAD.